Hi, Jeremy here, Damn Good Doctors Club. In today's video, we're taking a look at overthinking, right? How do we handle this? How do we balance the desire to make sure that we're really taking into account every little detail and giving people very comprehensive advice about their health, right? Because this is for physicians, right? This is Doctors Club, Damn Good Doctors Club. So we're talking about things that affect health practitioners. However, what I would say is that this also expands into anybody who is trying to use their brain to solve complex problems, because believe it or not, that's what medicine is, right? So if you aren't aware of this fact, then you need to wake up to this first, is that as a physician, as a healthcare practitioner, you're interfacing with a patient's body, right? And the human body is not a simple system. It's not a complicated system, right? It's not mechanical. It's not like taking apart a watch or a car engine or something like that. You can't just take out the bad gut and install the new gut, right? It doesn't work like that. We're dealing with a complex system. There's a whole science around that, right? There's a whole study and a field of thought around complexity systems, how to interface with these things, right? Because a lot of the trouble with complex systems is that they're complex and that they're emergent. We have emergent properties, meaning your patient's symptoms, they don't just come from one thing necessarily. Sometimes they do, right? Sometimes we do get lucky. There's just one little cause, one single thing. The patient can get very quick and easy fix, and a Band-Aid treatment can work. However, for most of my colleagues here, and given what we're dealing with the public and how all these complex inflammatory conditions are on the rise, right? If you're not noticing this, you need to start paying attention that people are getting Lyme disease, fibromyalgia, mold exposure. We now have long haulers, right? All the autoimmune stuff, chronic fatigue syndrome. There's a ton of these conditions. And maybe this isn't your area of expertise or your area of specialty. Maybe you're watching this and you're focused on something like orthopedics, right? Which is totally fine. Or you're working on maybe like a midwife or something. You're just working on one very specific aspect, right? It's a little more specialized, which is great. But just because you're specialized in a different area doesn't mean it's any simpler to work with the complex system of the human body. So whether you're working with fertility or insomnia or addiction and recovery, right? Whatever your specialty is, the humans that you're working with are subject to the laws of a complex system in their body. And what this does, right? So what this does, we're going to get back to overthinking here. What this does is if you have ethics, right, and you actually care about your work and you want to help your patients, then you start thinking about every single thing because you don't want to oversimplify the complexity of the complex system, which is good. It's a good thing to do. And what I would also say is that the next step beyond that is to start to organize, start to see patterns, start to organize a plan, a treatment plan. We call it clinical clarity, where you're getting algorithms together in terms of how you handle people that have universal complaints, but that manifest in unique ways, so that you're not doing cookie cutter medicine, right? So you can do all this stuff, but it takes a lot of thought. In the beginning, at least, there's a huge effort outlay to do this mental work. It's agony, it's excruciating. I can tell you right now, it doesn't feel good to churn and grind your brain around all these contingencies and possibilities and what ifs. And if this, then what, right? Meaning if I do this treatment for this person and then they respond this way, what does that tell me? And if they respond that way, what does that tell me? And if they respond this way, what does that tell me? And you start thinking ahead of all the possible combinations and permutations of how their complex system is going to react and respond. And then, of course, that's only what you can think of. So in real life, we're always iterating and getting feedback. So as we do kind of mature as practitioners and become more seasoned, we've had more and more opportunities to have these feedback loops on different patients. And if we're paying attention, if we've got our systems right around this, which is one of the things that I'm always harping on, and that our programs are designed to help you develop these types of systems with the way you organize your medicine, then the more experience you have, the more you can condense time, and you can become an expert faster. But you become an expert because you're updating your algorithms. So all the little things you didn't think about, right, that fell through your mental cracks, right, you will find them over time. You give a patient, so for me, I'm trained in Eastern medicine, right, herbs. I've got a very strong background as a clinical herbalist and Chinese medicine, and there might be an herb formula that I give, and I've given it to 100 patients with a certain presentation, totally cool, great, good, I know what to expect. And there's one person who responds in a totally opposite way, right? Maybe it's a formula that usually gives people loose stools, if anything, and this person gets bound up and constipated from it. So now I have to go, why, right? And I have to start to rework my mental framework, and I have to put a new branch on my algorithm and start thinking, okay, if I give this and then I get that response, which is possible, not common, right? But possible, what does that tell me? And how does that guide my next step, my next clinical decision making? Because ultimately what's going to happen is you are developing a process, a thought process. This is a different level of medical practice. It's a different level of practitioner, and it's a ton of work. It's a ton of mental work to get this dialed in. Getting the framework is like half the battle, but then you still have to feed it. Just because you've done the work to actually get yourself a bit of a flow chart, now you have to maintain it, right? It is a lot of work. There's no way around it. I can't sugarcoat it. But the people who do that work are in a whole different league from people who haven't. This is a barrier to entry. You finish school, you finish your foundational training, you finish your whatever it is, right? Where they're teaching you your basic skill that goes with the letters after your name, whatever it is. It could be functional medicine, naturopath, chiropractor, DO, MD, whatever it is, right? ND. Doesn't matter. You get your foundational training, and then after that, now you have to actually bring it to life. So the work's not over just because you graduated or you finished your program. And I think everybody watching this knows that. This is going to be a process. And what happens is many people get out of the schooling and they just stay at that level. And what happens then is we're trying to match our solutions to problems. Like we're trying to just plug in those things. Kids have a shape sorter, right? Where you're putting the square peg in the square hole and the star-shaped peg in the star-shaped hole. And you're trying to do that with your patients. Ultimately, that's what happens. And it turns into guesswork because we don't just have 5 or 6 tools. You can get hundreds of different tools, all the different supplements and vitamins and micronutrients and herbs and tinctures and homeopathics and pharmaceuticals and over-the-counter stuff and food, diet as medicine. Think of all the different potential solutions that you have in your toolbox. And how do you choose? How do you prioritize these things? How do you rank them? Right? So that kind of work is what's going to separate somebody who just got out and is stagnant in their growth, right? They just have a toolbox. It's going to separate you from that level because now you've got not only a toolbox, but you know how to thread that. So all your shiny pearls are threaded in a way that makes sense and you can navigate for patients so that you're not overwhelming them. And guess what? Your patients, by the way, are tired of people guessing. They've had it with that. They already tried the last 2 or 3 or 10 practitioners they tried were people at that level where they're just kind of reaching in, throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks. Right? Even if it's based on lab testing. I know I'm going after a sacred cow here. Lab testing is great, right? But it's one point of information. How many patients have you had that their labs, you're doing all the things that their labs call for. You're supplementing the B vitamins or whatever it is, and they still don't feel great. Or their labs come back and they look normal. Ooh. But something's not normal. Something's not right. So we have to have different ways to think about this stuff and different ways to organize our strategies so that we can take people not only on a solution like, okay, here's the missing thing, here's the supplement, here's the magic beans that you need, right? It's not that. Here's the process. Here's how we move through your body system by system in a way that you're going to get healthier and healthier. And every time we have a little hiccup or something doesn't go the way we expect it to go, that tells us how to pivot, how to change, right? So you want to develop this. This is clinical clarity. This is one of the 3 pillars that we do in Damn Good Doctors Club. And now clinical clarity requires a certain amount of willingness to think ahead. And I have all different ways, mental models and exercises that I like to use in terms of thinking ahead. And I mean, we do things like predictive hindsight, right? And we're of course nurturing that algorithm, and we're looking at how could something go wrong. What's likely to happen? If this is the wrong herb or the wrong supplement, how would you know? What would that look like? What does that tell us? You start thinking about all these things. And it's really easy, too, to get lost in complexity because the other thing is now we're looking at a multifaceted, complex system, meaning this human's life. So we know that it's not just food, it's not just nutrition. When practitioners say all disease begins in the gut, right? Wrong. Not always. Okay? Absolutely not always. We can't say all about anything because it's a complex, multifaceted system. Don't put the blinders on, right? Do not exclude valid information from your thought process. But the other side of that is, how do we know what's significant? Because now we're lost in the land of the 10,000 things where we're looking at, yes, diet, emotions, exercise, injuries, sleep habits, right? There's so many things that affect somebody's health. Genetics, mindset. There's a ton of it. Where they live, what the climate is, what the time of year is, what cycle they're in their life, what their age is, how many kids they've had. So many things, right? So now we're looking at all these little details. Is there mold in your house? That's a big one. Chemical exposure. I could keep going, right? Your list of inputs is probably pretty massive in terms of all the stuff that you look at. So it's easy to start overthinking, right? That's the other side of it. It's easy to keep the blinders on and just think, what I learned in school, follow the protocol, right? Just like do that, treat the lab test, right? And then we get to a certain point where we go, okay, that's oversimplifying. It works for some people sometimes, but it's not satisfying. You know, you got way too many people falling through too big of cracks. So now we go, okay, well, we put the blinders on, we oversimplified. Now let's just acknowledge the complexity, and then we get lost in the complexity, right? We don't want to surrender to the complexity. So we need a way to navigate the complexity. And this is the balance, because overthinking, right? Overthinking will damage you long term. There's different reasons why overthinking is a problem. One is that we can use it as a procrastination method. This comes with perfectionists. So a lot of practitioners have a very high level of specificity, right? We hold ourselves to a high quality standard. And that also goes hand in hand with people who tend to have perfectionist traits, which, believe it or not, as it turns out, I am one of those people with some perfectionist traits, and I'm working on it, right? I am working on it. So I know this from both sides. When we get perfectionists, then we can start to be a little bit overthinky, and it turns into a way to avoid failure, right? It's a procrastination tool. So that's kind of the trap with perfectionism. I've spoken on that in other videos. I'm not going to get too far into that today, but that oftentimes is some of the backbone behind the overthinking. Now, when you're overthinking, right, for a patient, just know that you have years, decades, whatever, of context and experience built up that they don't have. That's part of what separates you from them. That's part of what makes you valuable for them, is your ability to use your advanced and developed context to reduce the complexity of their health condition for them on their behalf, right? You absorb that complexity. That's part of the value that you provide. So if you try to externalize the overthinking, right, and you think out loud at them, then basically what you're doing is you're having somebody drink from a fire hose, okay? So you need to have some discretion in terms of how much you communicate, and that's where wisdom comes in. That's where the wisdom to say what needs to be said and not much more, right? That's an important skill, because now you can give people what they need to take action that's built on first principle thinking, right? But you don't have to blow their minds, especially if you're working with patients with like chronic fatigue syndrome, like I am, or people with brain fog, right? It's not that they can't handle this information, but at a certain point, when somebody's just starting to heal, or maybe they're bedridden, or they've only got, so much bandwidth for the day, you don't want to blow them out, like max them out, trying to give them an entire medical education in an hour, right? You've got to give them the bite-sized stuff that has leverage that then can open up, so now they can pay more attention. They can, over the long term, they can learn better ways to take care of their health, right? But you just want to give them the bite-sized pieces that have the most leverage. So you need to be able to sift that out, okay? So overthinking, right, can damage your patient if you're doing it at them. It can put them off, right? And also it can damage you because you've only got so much brain power long term. Now, overthinking is different. We need to differentiate overthinking from thinking through, right? Because I'm not saying don't overthink, right? Which means don't think, right? I'm not saying don't think. You need to think. And sometimes this effort of taking your system 2, right, slow cognitive processes that are just kind of grinding out the new layers of things you're starting to understand and turning that into an automatic, intuitive understanding, that takes effort. That takes a process. So we have to be able to think things through, right? So how do we know the difference between thinking things through and overthinking? Well, if you're thinking something through, then there's an endpoint, right, to the thought process. There's an endpoint. Overthinking can be used as a procrastination method, because it never has to stop. You're always going to go around and around and around, right? But thinking things through, you'll come out with a logical endpoint. So if you're looking at a decision and you're thinking a decision through, you'll come out with A or B, right? And you've mapped them out to a certain level to where you can make a decision and take action. And now there's a lot of times with decisions, there's not a perfect decision that's a slam dunk, right? Like decision A is 100% perfect, decision B is 100% awful. Obviously, I'm going to do decision A, right? Usually, when we start overthinking things, it's because each decision we could make has a certain appeal to it, right? A certain level. One of them's not totally garbage, right? Otherwise, it would be out of the running in the first place. So when you're thinking, you don't want to fall into overthinking, which means that you're just going around and around and around. At a certain point, you need to think it through. You need to make that decision. And then that's how you know that you're not really being fueled by procrastination and perfectionism. Because the ability to think something through until it's good enough to decide and take action, that's a whole different deal. So in terms of answering patients' questions, think it through, right? Think it through and give them the detail that they need so that they can then take action, right? Or thinking things through for your patient might be that you consolidate a complex question into two very straightforward decision points, or three, or whatever. You know, here's what I would do in your shoes. If I went with option A, this is what I'd be looking at. If I went with option B, this is what I'd be looking at. If I went with option C, this is what I'd be looking at. All in terms of pros and cons, what to expect, and how that leaves you further on down the line, right? So you can help people with their health by trying to make their decision making more straightforward for them, and help them with the parameters and the attributes that they care about, the things that matter to them. Help them lay those out so that they know what they're doing, right? When it comes to how to change their diet, or when to sleep in, or when to exercise, right? Or what herbs to take, or what supplements to use, or whatever it is. But in the process, you don't want to blow out your brain. Overthink, 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 right? So if you're not doing the perfectionist thing, you're not using overthinking as a way to escape your fate, right? You're not procrastinating. You're not trying to do it in a way to stall, right? Another one, I mean, people overthink too as a compensatory mechanism, so that when you do finally have your answer, the thing that you're going to say, that you're going to put out there, that you feel like you can defend it, you know, that nobody can ever accuse you of not having thought it through, right? All these things come from fear, and, you know, some basically some form of fear, some form of scarcity, and all that, where we want to have defensibility around our thoughts. And it's not necessarily unhealthy to have some fear and to want defensibility, right? But you also have to be willing to balance that so that you can ship your idea, right, without taking forever. And that's a skill. We have to be able to move. Even with imperfect information, imperfect decisions, we have to be able to move. And that's how you know if you're thinking something through or if you're overthinking, right? Overthinking, you won't be able to ever hit enter on the keyboard, right? You won't be able to ever post the video, publish the video, or answer the question, because you're too busy thinking about it, right? But thinking it through has an endpoint. And this is a big, big differentiation. It'll save you a lot of trouble and a lot of time. One of the lovely things about specializing and about running your practice with a lot of the principles we use in Damn Good Doctors Club is that once you've thought something through, you don't have to rethink it through to the same level. You use that, you've built up mental equity, cognitive equity in your decision making around a certain type of case, a certain type of presentation. Like I said before, we've got clinical clarity algorithms, right? So certain types of people with certain types of problems, how they tend to deviate, right? I've seen this once, I'll see it again, I've marked it, and I'm not even relying on my brain. I've got a map, you know, of how my work operates, the process you take people through, so that every time you get a new patient, you're not just back to square one with the drawing board. And at the same time, you're not just projecting on them either, right? You're not just putting them in a box because, oh, I've seen this before, so it must be this. No, you develop, it's so black and white, right? You develop these flexible ways to think that are still taking advantage of the mental effort that you've invested in the past for cases similar to this. It's a whole different way to practice. And you sure don't want to be just reaching in the toolbox, grabbing random stuff and throwing at them, right? Which I don't think is going to be a problem for the people in our world. We're way, way past that point. If these types of conversations resonate with you and you're working on growing your practice, building your practice, going online, developing a stronger presence online, you may enjoy our group, Damn Good Doctors Club. It's a chat group. It's free to join as a guest. There's an application, of course. I filter for who comes in because we've got a lively and vibrant community, and I aim to keep it that way. However, if you take your time and you're thoughtful and thorough with your application, and I read it, which I will do, I'll take my time too, and you look like a great fit for our group, then I'm happy to welcome you in, and I'll get you in just as soon as I can. It is free to join as a guest. I do have paid programs. I do have official mentorships. I'm very selective about who I work with. I'm not cheap to work with. Why would I be, right? I know what I'm doing. I value my time. I value my attention. And I really value the long-term relationships and the practitioners we already have. But if that's something you're considering, right? Oh, I need mentorship. I need help. What are these clinical clarity algorithms? I feel like I need to be able to think more cleanly about how to help my patients without overthinking, without falling into perfectionism, right? Without just breaking my brain. This is the place. Okay, so I would encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity to come in for free, and you can ask me anything you like in there. I'll give you my perspective, and maybe you'll make some friends. We have a vault full of videos that are interactive that'll help you fill in some other blind spots, because besides clinical clarity, we're also working on personal cultivation and fractal systems. Right? Personal cultivation is how to make sure that you have the adequate self-awareness and leadership skills so that your level of personal development doesn't become a handbrake on the growth of your practice and your ability to help other people. And fractal systems is how do you implement all of these things and go online, especially. We can do brick and mortar, but online is more my wheelhouse. How do you work online in a way where your work can scale up, right, and be non-linear? Look at this guy, right? Without you burning out, right? You want to be able to help a lot of people over the long term. So there you have it. Damn Good Doctors Club. I'll take a look at your application and maybe I'll see you there. All right, get to work.